Welcome, everybody. I'm Charles Payne in for Neil Cavuto. Ronald Reagan was born 102 years ago today, and boy, things have changed since then. Now, back then, the income tax, it didn't exist, and today, Democrats, well, they're pushing to raise the top rate even more and make the government even bigger. President Reagan's budget director, David Stockman, says if Reagan were alive today, he'd be horrified at both parties. He's the author of the upcoming book, The Great Deformation, The Corruption of Capitalism in America, and he joins me for an extensive chat. David, thanks a lot for your time tonight. You know, lately, over the last couple of years, you have become something of a person who's saying pox on both houses. In other words, I'm finding it hard to pin you down, and you seem to be upset and angry about almost everything that's going on by everyone involved in the solutions, or would-be solutions. Why?
Well, because I think we've drifted 180 degrees from where we started in 1981 and where I think Ronald Reagan was trying to take us, even though in the end he didn't make much progress and he failed. But he had three principles which I think are solid and important. Number one, sound money. Number two, fiscal rectitude. Number three, liberate the free market and allow prosperity to break out in the private sector. Where we are today is 180 degrees from that. We hardly have a free market left. We bailed out autos, we bailed out Wall Street, medical, education, energy. They're all heavily impacted and manipulated by government. Fiscal rectitude, you can't even mention that word now. We have 17 trillion of debt, and it's out of control, and both parties are to blame. And sound money. I mean, he would be appalled to see the kind of reckless, wild, almost lunatic money printing that's going on by the Fed today, and especially that it was done by Republican appointees. He thought Greenspan was a solid conservative gold standard man, and he turned out to be the biggest money printer to ever occupy the Federal Reserve. And then Republicans appointed Bernanke, who's just an out-and-out Keynesian, and he has monetized trillions of the debt. Ronald Reagan was totally opposed to all of that, and yet here we are 30 years later, and this is where it's gone. And not only because of the Democrats, that's why I'm upset, because the Republicans have taken us down this path. You know, it's interesting
because Ronald Reagan had to work with Volcker, and I think at the time he was a question mark, as to what his policies would be. But do you think one of the central themes that has changed over the last 30 years is the inability of Americans to accept any form of pain? In other words, the notion that there should always be a soft landing delivered by whether it's monetary policy or fiscal policy, because then what Paul Volcker did was tough. I mean, the initial first year or so under Ronald Reagan, it wasn't easy. I mean, it was really tough. People had to go through a certain amount of pain before they could come out on the other side feeling a lot better.
That's exactly right. And the greatest achievement in office that Ronald Reagan had was that he backed Volcker all the way without hesitation, even when there was enormous political pressure from the Republicans on the Hill, from a certain faction of the White House staff that really wanted to actually drum Volcker out. And I remember once Leader Baker said, "Get your foot off the back of American business." But Ronald Reagan stuck with him. He said this wild, massive inflation we had in the 1970s was caused by too much money printing, too much ease at the Fed. It had to be reversed. It had to be stopped. It would be painful to get from here to there. But he saw it through, and that's the main reason we had a recovery in the mid-1980s, because we defeated inflation and we allowed the private sector to have at least a few years before we got into the wild money printing of the Greenspan era.
So here